Hello, and welcome to Historical Humans Reads, where we take primary sources and bring them to your screen. I'm Colum Coleman, and today we are reading from a 1979 award winning novel that has been banned in both South Africa and parts of the United States. With a slow and fragmented unraveling of dark themes of mental illness, abuse, death, and the Holocaust, this story envisions its characters as flawed and damaged people struggling to move through the world. The story is, of course, Sophie's Choice by William Styron. Today we will be reading from Chapter 1 of Sophie's Choice by William Styron. And with that, let's begin. In those days, cheap apartments were almost impossible to find in Manhattan. So I had to move to Brooklyn. This was in 1947. And one of the pleasant features of that summer, which I so vividly remember, was the weather, which was sunny and mild, flower fragrant, almost as if the days had been arrested in a seemingly perpetual springtime. I was grateful for that, if for nothing else. Since my youth, I felt, was at its lowest ebb. At 22, struggling to become some kind of writer, I found that the creative heat, which at 18 had nearly consumed me with its gorgeous, relentless flame, had flickered out into a dim pilot light, registering little more than a token glow in my breast, or wherever my hungriest aspirations once resided. It was not that I no longer wanted to write. I still yearned passionately to produce the novel which had been for so long captive in my brain. It was only that, having written down the first few fine paragraphs, I could not produce any others, or, to approximate Gertrude Stein's remark about a lesser writer of the lost generation, I had the syrup, but it wouldn't pour. To make matters worse, I was out of a job and had very little money, and was self-exiled to Flatbush. Like others of my countrymen, another lean and lonesome young southerner wandering amid the kingdom of the Jews. Call me Stingo, which was the nickname I was known by in those days, if I was called anything at all. The name derives from my prep school days down in my native state of Virginia. This school was a pleasant institution, to which I was sent at 14 by my distraught father, who found me difficult to handle after my mother died. Among my other disheveled qualities was apparently an inattention to personal hygiene, hence I became known as Stinky. But the years passed, the abrasive labor of time, together with a radical change of habits, I was in fact shamed into becoming almost obsessively clean, gradually wore down the harsh syllabic brusqueness of the name, slurring off into the more attractive, or less unattractive, certainly sportier, Stringo. Sometime during my 30s, the nickname and I mysteriously parted company, Stingo merely evaporating like a wan ghost out of my existence, leaving me indifferent to the loss. But Stingo I was still during this time about which I write. If, however, it is perplexing that the name is absent from the earlier part of this narrative, it may be understood that I am describing a morbid and solitary period in my life, when, like the crazy hermit in the cave on the hill, I was rarely called by any name at all. I was glad to be shut out of my job, the first and only salary position, excluding the military, of my life. Even though its loss seriously undermined my already modest solvency. Also, I now think it was constructive to learn so early in life that I would never fit in as an office worker, anytime, anywhere. In fact, considering how I had so coveted the job in the first place, I was rather surprised at the relief, indeed, the alacrity, with which I accepted my dismissal only 5 months later. In 1947, jobs were scarce, especially jobs in publishing. But a stroke of luck had landed me employment with one of the largest publishers of books, where I was made junior editor, a euphemism for manuscript reader. That the employer called the tune. In those days, the dollar was much more valuable tender than it is now, and may seem, in the stark terms of my salary, $40 a week. After withholding taxes, this meant that an anemic blue check placed on my desk each Friday by the hunchbacked little woman who managed the payroll represented emolument in the nature of little over 90 cents an hour. But I had not been in the least dismayed by the fact that these coolie wages were dispensed by one of the most powerful and wealthy publishers in the world. Young and resilient, I approached my job, at least in the very beginning, with a sense of lofty purpose. And besides, in compensation, the work bore intimations of glamour. Lunch at 21, dinner with John O'Hara, poised and brilliant, but carnal-minded lady writers melting at my editorial acumen, and so on. It soon appeared that none of this was to come about. For one thing, although the publishing house, which had prospered largely through textbooks and industrial manuals and dozens of technical journals in fields as varied and arcane as pig husbandry and mortuary science and extruded plastics, did publish novels and nonfiction as a sideline, thereby requiring the labor of junior aestheticians such as myself. Its list of authors would scarcely capture the attention of anyone seriously concerned with literature. At the time I arrived, for example, the two most prominent writers being promoted were a retired World War II fleet admiral and an exceptionally fly-blown ex-communist stool pigeon whose ghost-written mea culpa was doing middling well on the bestseller lists. Of an author of the stature of John O'Hara, although I had far more illustrious literary idols, John O'Hara represented for me the kind of writer a young editor might go to and get drunk with. There was no trace. Furthermore, there was the depressing matter of the work to which I had been assigned. At that time, McGraw-Hill and Company, for such was my employer's name, lacked any literary clout, having for so long and successfully purveyed its hulking works of technology that the small trade book house in which I labored, and which aspired to the excellence of Scribner or Knopf, was considered something of a joke in the business. It was a little as if a vast huckstering organization like Montgomery Ward or Masters had the effrontery to set up an intimate salon dealing in mink and chinchilla that everyone in the trade knew were dyed beaver from Japan. This has been an excerpt from Sophie's Choice on Historical Humans Reads. If you enjoyed this video and would like to hear more excerpts from original texts, please subscribe to be notified of the next one. If there's a work you would like to hear, please be sure to like this video and leave a comment listing it below. Thank you for listening.